Right. Firstly, thank you all so much for coming. It's great to have um, all of you here. It's great to see new faces every single week. It's really wonderful to see how this is growing. So keep on let's doing it. Everyone bring a friend next week, right? Okay, today we're actually going to start. I mean, I know we're currently in the middle of a series towards a more compassionate world, right? We looked at why it matters what we think about other people. We looked at empathy, and if you missed those, you can catch them up on the podcast. You know the drill by now, right? Although it's still the second part is still not on the podcast, but hopefully it should be up soon. And we today we're gonna move into the way we talk about other people. Anyone is familiar with this concept at all?
The way we talk
about other people.
About other people or with other people.
Both, actually.
Okay. Well, we definitely don't want to do Lashon Hara.
Right. Thank you. So you may or may not have heard of the term before Lashon Hara, which is Hebrew words. What does Lashon Hara actually mean?
Evil speech. Evil tongue.
Evil speech, yeah. Evil tongue, evil speech, right? Now, welcome, come on in. And no worries, there should be chairs. Just put up a chair somewhere and join us. What's so terrible about speaking bad about other people? And we're gonna go into later on in the class, we're gonna go into what constitutes Lashon Hara, because Lashon Hara is actually only one out of 5 categories of forbidden speech in Jewish law. What's so terrible about talking bad about other people?
Yeah, undo
it. Yeah,
you can't undo it.
And it hurts the person that's listening to you do it, also besides the person that you're talking about.
Okay. Okay, that's it.
Well, no. Because it can be, you talk about someone, you may not have the facts straight, and it can be very detrimental to that person who you're talking about. And the person you're talking to can spread it too, and it gets worse. And it can be very harmful, hurtful to the, so that's what you gotta be careful.
Okay. So it's interesting because when sometimes someone once asked me the question, like, what's Judaism's view on Lashon Hara? Right? What is it considered a sin? How bad of a sin it is? So I want to read you out what the Talmud says. There are 4 transgressions for which one pays in this world and in the next. Number 1 is idolatry. Number 2 is sexual immorality. Number 3 is murder, which incidentally are the big 3 in Judaism, that a person is supposed to forfeit their life rather than transgress one of these. And if you're curious as to why, we can discuss that in another class, because it's fascinating to understand why these are so important, that it's worthwhile giving up your life, because in Judaism, the value of human life is up there, right? Shabbat is important. If God forbid someone's life is in danger, and even a questionable danger, we break Shabbat for it, right? That's how important human life is. Then it says, and Lashon Hara is equivalent in severity to them all, right? So the Talmud is saying to all of them, all 3 of them.
Okay.
The Talmud is saying there are 3 big sins. There are 3 big things that we are not allowed to do in Judaism, right? And you're supposed to give up your life rather than do them. And Lashon Hara is comparable to all 3 of them, right? And if you think about it, it's a wild concept. I don't know if you've heard it before. Even if you've heard it before, imagine it's the first time you're hearing it. It's a wild concept, right? Like, you're trying to tell me that we know how destructive murder is, right? You're trying to tell me that me talking bad about someone else is equivalent to murder. Like, that sounds a bit wild. So let me continue actually by telling you a wild story. So there was a rabbi called the Chofetz Chaim. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, sorry. And he was called the Chofetz Chaim. Why? Because he wrote a book that is called, any guesses? Well done. Called the Chofetz Chaim, right? What is this book about? It's based on a phrase in Tehillim, which says, Mia Isha Chavetz Chaim, who is the person who wants life? And the answer, who wants life and desires good, a good life. And the answer that Tehillim, that Psalms gives, is guard your mouth from talking bad about other people. And so what the Chavetz Chaim did in this book, the Chavetz Chaim, is he wrote down all the laws of permitted and forbidden speech in Judaism. And it was a book that really, I think, if we look at history, revolutionized this concept, right? It now became the phrase Lashon Hara now became like a household name, kind of. So many, just by a show of hands, and there's no embarrassment if you haven't. How many people in this room had heard of the word Lashon Hara before tonight?
Have not heard it?
Have.
I thought it's pronounced.
It could be. It depends on Ashkenazi, Sephardi, right? But everyone's heard about it, right? It's become a household name. And it's because of this book that he wrote. In fact, there's a calendar that was introduced later on, which splits up the book so that you can learn 2 laws a day, and you go through the calendar, you go through the whole book. I think every few months, I think you go through it 2.5 times a year or something like that. And it really brought this severity and the laws of how we talk to and with other people to the collective consciousness of the Jewish people. So he's once traveling with another rabbi, and they're there to do some sort of spiritual job for the Jewish people. And they stop on the way, and they stay in one of those, like, there's a woman who owned, like, I guess, a guest house that was called in those days. And she put up the 2 rabbis, and as part of hosting them, she offered them a meal. So the next morning, as they're getting ready to go, she turns to the 2 rabbis and she says, "How was the food?" Chavetz Chaim says, "It was great." And the other rabbi said, "It was great. Thank you so much for having us. The food could have used a bit more salt." And the woman heard, and then she walked out. And the Chavetz Chaim was visibly distressed. And he turned around to the other rabbi and he says, "I don't understand this, right? I have been so incredibly careful my entire life not to talk bad about other people. And then I come on this spiritual mission with you. It must be there's something wrong with the mission that we're doing, that I was put in this position where I am kind of a partner, a witness to this Lashon Hara going on." So the other rabbi says to him, like, "What do you mean?" He says, "She asked me how it was. I said it was good. I thanked her for putting us up. All I said was it could use a bit more salt. I didn't say it was terrible. Like, come on, like what's the big deal?" Chavetz Chaim says, "You don't understand. This woman who hosted us, she probably doesn't cook the food herself, right? She probably employs someone. Now, who's she going to employ? She probably employs, someone who is a widow, or who is single, who needs to take on the job of a chef to support herself. Now, you said to the hostess of the owner of this guest house, that the food was lacking salt. So she's now going to go into the kitchen and she's going to berate the chef and say, "How could you do that? We have these 2, important, prominent rabbis. How could you not make sure that the food was up to standard?" And the chef is going to probably say, to defend herself, "What do you mean? I tasted it was fine." And they're going to get it, and the owner of the guest house is going to get into a fight with her and say, "What do you mean you're accusing those rabbis of lying?" And what's probably going to happen is she's probably going to fire her. And this poor widow, who has no other means to support herself, is now going to be left without a job. What do you think when you hear that story?
I'm having a hard time believing that the owner of the inn would berate her.
Sounds, if we could be honest, it sounds wild and far-fetched.
I don't think so.
Okay, we have divided opinions, which is great.
Comes into your inn, you know who he is, and you know that he's with another, like, pretty important rabbi. Rebbetzin Heller gives us, like, a shir that I listened to a long time ago, and she said something about, imagine the Chavetz Chaim was coming to your house to eat. What do you do? And she's like, you put out everything and make sure it has the, like, most strict texture on it you possibly can, and put everything, like, make sure, like, you look super duper kosher, right? Of course she's going to go back in the kitchen and say something to her, because this was not a small visit for them.
Okay.
Well,
but maybe they don't know. Sorry,
Trudy.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I think, the person that said it could have used a little bit more salt didn't think that it would have that fan of a ramification, you know, he just was doing
Yeah.
that, but look how it can spiral.
It could spiral. And want to hear the end of the story?
Sure.
Right? So the Chofetz Chaim says, okay, fine. You know, let's test the theory. Let's go into the kitchen and see what's going on. So they walk into the kitchen, and lo and behold, the owner of the guest house is berating the chef. And the chef obviously is distraught, and the Chofetz Chaim and the rabbi, so it goes over to the host, the owner of the guest house, and says, no, look, we don't want you to fire her. We don't want you to get rid of her, right? Like it was a small thing, right? He tries to patch it up, and the owner of the guest house was a good person, right? And she listened to him. She's like, no, you know, I'm not going to fire her. I just wanted her to take it seriously. And I think the point of the story is that you think, I'll tell you my experience, because it may have been different for you. When I first read this story, I'm like, I can't teach this. This story is like wild, far-fetched. No one will believe it, right? Yet, I want to say something that I bet if I asked people in this room to think about a comment that someone said to you when you were a child that impacted your life, positively or negatively, I bet each of us could think of something, at least one. Right? And sometimes those benign little comments that people say to us when we're young or whatever, they can have repercussions, right? We don't know what people are struggling with, right? When the rabbi said it could use a little bit more salt, did he think that, number one, this owner of the guest house is going to feel embarrassed and going to want to make sure that her place is up to scratch? Is he thinking that maybe there's a person on the other end whose livelihood depends on this? No. And it's the same thing. We say things and we don't know what it's going to trigger in someone else. You know, just by a show of hands, can anyone relate to this concept, this idea, this story of having something that was said years and years and years ago, that the impacts of it still impacts on your life?
Of course.
Yes. Right? So that is why it's considered so terrible, right? In Judaism, because if you think about it, what defines us as human beings is that we can speak, that we can communicate with each other, right? No other species has the level of communication that human beings have. And our words literally have the power to build people up and to destroy people. You know, we hear stories of people who get saved because of something someone else said to them. And God forbid, you know, the other way as well, literally and on other levels as well. So that is why it is so important to that's why it's put on such a pedestal in Judaism. There's another
about that story.
Yes.
So just playing on the opposite side. So if somebody asks you for direct feedback, how was my food? And you don't give a complete answer, you say, oh, no, it was wonderful, it was wonderful. Aren't they trying to improve based off of the information they receive? And if you don't give that information, then they're not given the opportunity to improve.
Right.
Like if she didn't care about her food, she wouldn't have asked the question in the first place.
Maybe she was just trying to, I mean,
when you are hosting somebody and you just think, how was the food? You know, like it would be not asking for feedback.
You're asking a very good question and a very important question. And Jewish law actually deals with this, right? Deals with this balance that we have to have in our life, right? That on the one hand, you're not allowed to hurt other people with your words. And on the other hand, you're not allowed to, you can't be dishonest, right? I'll give you an example, right? Someone comes to you, they've just bought a pair of shoes. And they say to you, what do you think of my shoes? And you think they look terrible on them. Should you say something or should you not say something?
I would say something so she doesn't walk around the relationship like looking like a doofy.
I mean, there's a story in the Talmud that says that, if you go to a wedding and the bride is always beautiful, basically. Like your bride is so beautiful, even if she's not. The shoes are the same thing; they're already bought.
So it depends. Are the shoes returnable or not? Right? If the this is real in Jewish law.
Your best friend and your best friend is like, tell me, do you like my shoes? And you know what I mean? Like
the point also here is to bear in mind is can she do anything about it, right? If they're refundable and she's asking you and she wants your opinion and you tell her, no, they look terrible on you or whatever, or in a nicer way, right? I think a different style would kind of look better on you, whatever it is that we kind of have to say, right? And she's going to then take it back to the store, then it's one thing. But if they are final sale, end of the line, no returns, no exchange pair of shoes, and you're just going to tell her, no, like, what have you done, right? You've made her feel bad, and there's no recourse to it, right? So the laws of it, and we're going to get into that a little bit of that next week, right? When we look at when you can talk bad about other people for a constructive purpose, and that's the balance that learning the laws of forbidden and permitted speech in Judaism strikes, is the balance between, on the one hand, you can't destroy people with your words, you can't hurt their feelings with your words, and you sometimes have to say things in a way that can push people. And there's so many different categories. Like next week, we're going to focus mostly on the times where you are allowed to talk bad about people. But there's something in Jewish law called tochacha, which means giving a rebuke to someone else, right? Sometimes you're allowed to tell someone, and you're encouraged to tell someone something that is doing wrong. The caveat of that in Jewish law, number one, is you have to have that relationship with that person, that they're able to hear it from you, right? If they're not able to hear it from you, don't say it. Yes, Nina. I'll take questions in a sec.
But I'm a little confused because the last example you just have given is she had asked somebody, do you like my shoes? And so are you supposed to lie or are you supposed to tell the truth? And on the other side of this is she liked the shoes. That's why she bought them. She's just looking for an opinion. That doesn't mean she has to return the shoes or can or can't. So where does it lie? Whose responsibility is it there? Because she's asking your opinion, even if it's not, obviously she liked them, but she might think she looks good in them. I mean, that seems like a fine line there.
Yes, it is a fine line. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I buy something and I'm not sure, right? I'm kind of on the fence. Do I like it? Do I not like it? So I just want to say, if anyone has teenage girls, they are great for this type of thing. They will give you honest feedback, right? Again, if she comes to you and she asks for advice and she's on the fence, let's just assume she's on the fence, right? She's like, I don't know, do you like them, do you not like them? And, there is a point that you just highlighted, that there's very much individual. It's not a moral thing, are these shoes good for you or not? There is an individual style and taste to it. Now, she's seeking your opinion. So if she could return the shoes or sell them on or do something with them, then give your honest opinion. But if she can't, then you're going to give your honest opinion, and all she's going to do is be stuck with these shoes and now feel bad about them. So what have you achieved, right? You've used your words to hurt and not things. So that, again, and I think when I learn these laws, I think it teaches us the beauty and the sensitivity that God expects us to treat other people with. Because you look at a situation like that and it's like, God expects us to be sensitive, thinking, caring individuals. You want my opinion? Great. But before I give you my opinion, let me think about whether my opinion is going to hurt you or help you. If it's just going to hurt you, then keep my opinion to myself. Yes.
How do you know if they're returnable? Like if she asked my opinion and I said, are they returnable? I think she know what my opinion is.
It's a good question. And it's kind of, a part of the thing, right? Like, and sometimes you got to be smart about it, right? You got to kind of like, oh, these are really nice. Where'd you get them from? Right? And she kind of tells you, well, I got them final sale from whatever, then you kind of get a clue. But again, it's that sensitivity that we're supposed to develop of measuring the impact of our words and how they're going to land with other people. You had a question.
Well, one thing was I would say, just because I'm a very individual person as far as what I like or don't like, so I would tell her, well, they're probably not my style, but that sounds, it sounds like that's something that works with you. In other words, I just because I don't like something doesn't mean that it doesn't look good on the other person or that it doesn't fit their style. So I would just say, well, that's not my style, but I'm glad you like those shoes. That'll go good with your X and X dress. You don't even have to say like there's a way to get around saying it. And then the other thing is, of course, you can always give your honest opinion if you're going shopping with them and they're in the store, because then you could just say, well, that dress, no, this dress, yes, because then you're in the store, you're not committed.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what Jessica says is it comes from a discussion in the Talmud of how you're supposed to compliment a bride, right, to the groom. And the crux of it at the end of the day is that there's beauty in everyone, right? So even if you can't see the beauty in the bride, find something. She's got beautiful ears, whatever it is, right? Like, again, because it's so subjective. I think the point, though, is to take out from these sort of questions and these conversations is, number one, these things are sensitive and our words have impact, and we have to be sensitive to that, and we have to be sensitive to how are my words going to land, right? This rabbi was like, oh, I'll tell her, I'll give feedback, I'll tell her this food needs a bit more salt, but he didn't realize the impact of what that's going to happen if you're hosting the president's entourage in your house, and it comes back to the salt wasn't, the food wasn't salty enough. You're gonna feel really bad about it, right? There's another reason about why it's so terrible, right? Because God created the world. You may or may not have noticed this, but the world is not perfect, and it's not by mistake, right? Anyone notice? Anyone ever notice? The world isn't perfect, right? It's not by mistake. God created an imperfect world. He created us imperfectly, and then he put us into this world and he said, partner with me and be my co-creators in helping bring the world closer to perfection. Now, when we understand the truth of this, we look at the imperfections within ourselves, within the world around us, differently, ideally, right? We look at them as, oh, these are things that God put me into this world to help move closer to perfection, right? God created me with, not enough patience, let's put it that way, right? It's not because I'm a terrible person. It's because this is something that God put me into the world and said, I want you to create a little bit more patience in your life. Now, a person who talks bad about someone else, what are they doing? They're doing the exact opposite. They are choosing to focus on the deficiencies, the weaknesses. And God says this is such a terrible thing that he and I cannot coexist in the same world. Why? Because God looks at our imperfections as things that we have to work on, right? It's progress. It's the little things that we do. And a person who talks bad about someone else is forgetting the purpose, right? What they're choosing to do is they're choosing to focus on the other person's weaknesses, on choosing to focus on the other person's deficiencies, instead of kind of looking at like, oh yeah, none of us are perfect. We all have areas to improve on. There's plenty of good things in other people as well. Is that clear? Right. So that is also why it's such a terrible thing to do. As Jessica also kind of said, it's kind of hard to take back words. There was a story, and you may or may not have heard various permutations of this story, but there's a story of someone who said something negative about someone else. And they went to the rabbi and they said, Rabbi, I feel terrible. I said this horrible thing about someone else, and now, how do I fix it? So the rabbi says, I'll tell you what, go get a packet of seeds and go sprinkle them outside. So the man says, okay, that was easy.
What?
A packet of seeds and sprinkle it outside. So he's like, okay, great. That's easy. I can do that. And he says, come back in 3 days. So the man goes, gets the packet of seeds, sprinkles them outside. 3 days go back, comes back to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, so he says, what do I need to do now? He's like, now I want you to go and collect those seeds. And he said to the rabbi, that's impossible. And the rabbi said, that's how hard it is to take back our words. And again, it goes back to what we said is we don't know what people are struggling with, right? We don't know. We tell someone, oh, why don't you call that person? And you don't know what type of relationship that person has with that person, right? You don't know the things that are underlying that you're triggering by saying these things to other people, right? You tell someone, and there's so many stories of this, right? I'm sure, again, we can all think of stories like that. I'll share a positive story with you, because it's nice to do positive things as well, right? Sometimes people ask me, like, why did you choose to become a teacher? And the truth is, I don't know if I did kind of choose to become a teacher or teaching chose me. I don't know, but whatever. And I often think back to one moment when I was a teenager, and I was talking to a friend about, I don't know, deep, meaningful conversation as teenagers sometimes do. And she said to me at the end of somewhere toward the end of the conversation, wow, you have such a great way of explaining things. You should become a teacher. And that simple comment sparked something within me, right? And years later, we're talking about, I don't know, 25 years ago that this story happened. I still remember it, and I still credit it for pointing me in a direction that I may not have done otherwise. And I'm sure we can all kind of think of stories like that happen to us, positive, negative, and I'm sure we may not hear about it. We have also done things for other people like that. Okay, any questions? Because then now I want to talk about the 5 things, the 5 parts of the 5 categories of forbidden speech in Jewish law. Okay?
Could you
Yes.
repeat the 3 things that are the worst things you can do?
Idolatry, murder, and adultery.
And sexual.
Yeah, immorality. Okay, what are the 5 categories of forbidden speech? Okay, the first one is something called rechilot. What is rechilot? It's gossip, right? What does it mean? Is, let's say someone comes to me, and Jane comes to me and says something about Judy, right? And I go over to Judy and says, do you know what Jane said about you? And tell her what I said about you. That is a category on its own that's called rechilot, right? Gossiping. Why is that so damaging?
It hurts the person she talked about, and then you're hurt because then it changes your view of somebody, so it affects you negatively, and then the person that said it also is in a bad place because of what they did.
Yes, and on a very simple level, how do Jane and Judy feel about each other right now?
Well, Judy knows that Jane is talking about her, so she can't trust her.
Yes, it could destroy relationships. It creates disharmony, conflict, right? It just, again, we're in this world to make the world a better place, to create harmony, to move the world close to perfection. When we're spreading what someone else said about someone else, we're doing the exact opposite of it. So that on its own is a category of forbidden speech in Judaism. Someone tells you something about someone else, we'll talk about what you're supposed to do. Definitely not allowed to go back and tell the person who was spoken about what was, and that someone else was speaking about them. The second category is the one that's very famous, which is called Lashon Hara. Now, what comes under the category of Lashon Hara does anyone know, out of interest?
Something true about somebody.
Yes. The very common question that people ask when they hear about Lashon Hara is, Lashon Hara means you mustn't talk bad about other people. But what about if it's true? This is Lashon Hara, right? If it's true, you know that this person did X, Y, Z, and you go tell someone else, that is Lashon Hara. If it's not true, it's also forbidden, but it's a different category. Okay, it's called Motzi Shem Ra, right? Which is ruining someone else's reputation, basically. And what? Yeah, slander, right? Like you allowed to, and I think it lines. I don't know how it lines up with secular law, but in Jewish law, Motzi Shem Ra is if someone to just spread rumors about someone else, right? You're spreading rumors that this person did X, Y, Z. It's not true. It's unverified, etc., etc. All of that would be considered Motzi Shem Ra. The fourth category is a very wide category, and this is called Onat Devarim, which literally means causing pain with your words. So any sort of comment that would cause someone else pain would be forbidden under this category, right? So you can already see that something could come under more than one category, right? Because if you're going to Judy and telling her, do you know what Jane said about you? And telling her what Jane said. So it comes under the rechilut, because you're spreading gossip. It comes under Lashon Hara because you're saying that Jane was talking bad about someone else, and it comes under Onat Devarim, right? Because you're hurting the other person with words. So you can multitask when it comes to talking badly about other people, right? But Onat Devarim is a very wide category. It really again demands and expects of us to think before we speak, right? To really think, how is the impact of going to land? Like, what if it's a joke? Would we be allowed to say something that's hurtful as a joke? No. And this thing of like, I was just joking, doesn't hold up in Judaism, right? You have to, you cannot hurt someone else's feelings with your words, even if it's a joke. And then the final category is called Avak Lashon Hara. So Avak Lashon Hara means kind of like, the literal translation means the dust of Lashon Hara. So what's included in this is something that isn't strictly speaking Lashon Hara, but it creates it either creates a situation where you would encourage someone else to speak Lashon Hara, or it's like it creates a taste of Lashon Hara. So, right? So I'll give you an example, right? Let's just say, okay, you've told Judy what Jane said. Now Judy, now you're Judy doesn't like Jane right now because of what Jane said about her. And now you start singing Jane's praises in front of Judy. What do you think Judy's going to say under those circumstances? She's also probably at some point going to say something not nice about Judy, right? Because Jane, whatever, I forget which one. That's the problem of using two J's, right? Right. I just wanted to choose names that weren't in the room, and I hope I did that, right? Right. So that would be considered a situation of Avak Lashon Hara. You're creating a situation where you're excessively praising someone, and it's going to cause someone in the room to talk bad about someone else, or you say something that is like a little bit snide or a little bit off-putting, right? Like someone says something and you roll your eyes behind their back or whatever, right? That is called Avak Lashon Hara because it leaves a bad taste about that person in their mouth. Okay, so those are the 5 categories. There's rechilut, which is kind of gossip. There's Lashon Hara, which is talking bad about other people when it's true. There's Motzi Shem Ra, which is spreading a rumor about someone else. There is Onat Devarim, any sort of words that we use that are harmful to someone else, and Avak Lashon Hara, like things that are subtle Lashon Hara. What's forbidden in these 5 categories? Is it forbidden to speak it?
Yeah.
Is it forbidden to write it?
Yes.
Is it forbidden to communicate it with our body language? Absolutely. Any sort of communication is forbidden. What about listening? Are we allowed to listen? No. So what do you do if someone starts talking?
Let's talk about something in.
best case scenario, change the conversation. If you can't, leave this situation. What about the stuff that you already heard?
You're supposed to feel like I feel like you're supposed to think through like, okay, what could I not know about the situation to like change the view of it in your head so that you're not believing what was said.
You're not allowed to believe it. That's correct, right? So yes, you're not allowed to communicate it in any way. You're not allowed to listen to it, and you're not allowed to. And if you've heard it already, you're not allowed to believe it, right? So that's what's forbidden in these things. Yes, Alina.
At my work, people love talking about each other. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but sometimes they just need to express their feelings. I listen to everybody, but I listen, and I think it helps even, those people who are talking, maybe, I don't know, it's true or not true, but bad things, but my role is like a therapist. I listen. I might be not thinking about it, but people just talk. Our supervisor didn't look at me good in a good way, and people need to talk about it.
So you ask a fantastic question, and that's what we're going to discuss next week. Right? We're actually going to spend an entire session next week on it because you could very well leave this class and sit and think to yourself, oh my gosh, like I'm never allowed to listen to my friend vent, or I'm never allowed to, tell anyone else about anyone that's bothering me, or I'm not allowed to, maybe is it wrong to go to a therapist? Is it because you're talking bad about other people? Is it right? What about if someone is, danger to society? Are we allowed to talk about them? So should I give you a spoiler in that? No. Come back next week and you'll find out whether there are some times where you are allowed to speak about other people. All right. Any questions, any thoughts, anything that kind of resonated with you that you kind of listened to and thought, wow, that was interesting, or that's something I've kind of like to try or kind of try not to do?